Jesus has just entered Jerusalem in what's called the triumphal entry. People cried, "Hosanna," and Jesus' first priority was to cleanse the temple of false leaders who were scamming people to make themselves rich and make a profit off of their religion.
When Jesus enters the temple, he sees people exchanging money and selling sacrifices.
At first glance, it seemed like this was just normal operating procedure. They had been selling animals in the temple for years. It was a matter of convenience. Rather than dragging a goat 1,000 miles to Passover, you could just buy one in the temple. But the motives of these sellers of animals were being exposed.
When people see this passage, they think Jesus is being harsh because people are selling sacrifices so they can worship God.
When we take a closer look, we start to understand why Jesus would do this in God's house. This is the second time Jesus has cleansed the temple. Why did he do it? See, what was really happening was these religious people, these religious leaders, these official temple representatives were actually stealing from the people. They were extorting from them. It was not helping the people, they were robbing the people.
They had to use the special temple money that they had to give their money for to then go and buy special temple animals that weren't the same as their own animals because their animals were unclean. The money of the common person that day couldn't be used in the temple. Instead, religious leaders had special temple money that was worth far less than the commoner's money, thus ripping the people off.
Instead of selling a bird for whatever the going rate of a bird for sacrifice was, they were exponentially increasing the price of the bird or the goat or the sheep. They were selling animals of inferior quality, and they were selling them at exorbitant rates. You see, this extortion was involved, and it was treacherous because the people couldn't defend themselves. They were there to worship God, and God's worship required animal sacrifice, and there was nowhere else to go. They had made it impossible for the people to provide for themselves. They had to buy these animals at these outrageous prices with this kind of money. They had invented a system that cheated the people in a perfectly inappropriate way. So you look at this whole scene and you see Jesus acting very, what we would say, un-Jesus-like, right? He made a whip, he chased people, he knocked over tables. Was this over the top, or was this a justifiable action from Jesus Christ?
To Jesus, all of life is worship. All of life is sacred. And so it's not just about the distraction from the worship of God in the temple. It's that on a very human level, these poor people who are giving all they have to sacrifice and worship God are being scammed. The people that are doing this to them are phonies, and so Jesus has to take action.
What this passage teaches us about who Jesus is that Jesus was ultimately always concerned about his Father's house. Jesus was defending his Father's house. He had zeal for his Father's house. That's what Jesus said. Zeal for my Father's house consumes me. That's what drove Jesus to do this act, was he wanted to protect God's name and not dishonor God's name.
So how does a temple in the Middle East, a bunch of sheep and goats around, a bunch of people in sandals and flowing robes 2,000 years ago, have anything to do with us right here, right now?
What does this all have to do with us? We don't have animal sacrifice in our worship. How does this apply to you and I in today's world?
At the most basic level, this passage is about people being distracted by sin from true worship of God. And what sin was that? In this case, stealing from poor people.
How this applies to us is this is all about worship. Worship has never been about form. Worship has always been exactly what Jesus said it is. It's in spirit and it's in truth. We worship God with right motives. We worship God with a clear conscience. And worship matters because God matters.
Jesus' final words in this passage to the money changers at the temple are these: destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He's talking about himself. Why? Because Jesus is the object of worship. Not the temple, not the money, not the tax collectors, not the doves, not the sacrifice.